Hi, everyone. This is Matthew Janda for CardRunners, and I'm here with SSNLers. You're Doing It Wrong Part 1, emphasizing betting because it's easier. So this is a new series. I've recently been doing pretty advanced Flopzilla stuff, more specifically out-of-position 3-bet pot play, which is hopefully quite useful to already very good players, but it's not that helpful for weaker players. This series is aimed at non-professional players who play SSNL or lower. It should be much easier and enjoyable to watch than most of my theory or Flopzilla videos. So note I'm using the term weaker players pretty loosely here. So you could still be a pretty good player. You know, if someone beats no limit 100 or no limit 200, especially if they play on the more difficult sites, a lot of those players can win 50, 60, 70 bucks an hour. So when I say weaker players, I'm using the term pretty loosely, and it just means you're not like some expert player who's been playing poker for the last 5 or 6 years, and you're probably a non-professional. That's who this is aimed at. So, unlike many series aimed at beginners, this series will not encourage you to develop bad habits you'll later have to forget when you move up. Instead, I'll try to emphasize concepts more using examples and be less heavy on theory and math. We'll also stress hands a bit more than ranges, since ranges can often get very complex. So, you are not going to be developing any bad habits here. That's super key, because I think a lot of times when people say like, hey, I'm going to make this video aimed at beginners, they're doing it because, first of all, it's easy to make a video aimed at beginners for the most part, and it lets them oversimplify difficult concepts so they don't have to spend as much time going into like the more detailed, difficult stuff. I'm not doing that here. I'm doing that here because I think this video will be very useful for a lot of people. It's an idea that I had, and it's not going to teach you bad habits that you have to unlearn. So I will be oversimplifying things a little bit because you usually can get into very detailed theory stuff, which we won't do here, but it's not going to develop you any bad habits. You're not going to have to relearn anything. In other words, here we'll try to pick the low-hanging fruit for each concept rather than get all of the fruit off the tree. So what I mean by that is when I do theory videos, it's usually designed for teaching you difficult concepts that can make you play super, super, super good, but that are quite difficult to implement. Here, we're going to be more focused on how do we do like the easier, most important stuff first, rather than how do we get these, really, really detailed, hard to implement concepts down. That's less important than getting the basic idea down. Okay, so some background. I've coached a lot of people who've told me a lot of different exploitative techniques they use when playing. They regularly use these as justifications for taking theoretically weak lines. There's a few problems with this. The first is game theoretically optimal lines typically are awesome against most, if not all, villains. I also hear a ton of contradictory stuff, even from winning players who play the same stakes at the same site. So, it's possible a theoretically correct line can be negative EV. So a good example of that would be if you're playing against someone that never folds to a river bet, even if you made a theoretically correct river bluff, it will be negative EV against that player. Nevertheless, if we take the game theoretically optimal line with every hand in our range, overall our range has to be profitable. So, the thing that people often get confused though is they don't realize, especially when you're taking optimal lines pre-flop and on the flop, that usually means, you're bluff raising with the right types of bluff raises. You're calling with the right calls. You're raising with the right hands that need to be raised for value. Those hands are pretty much going to be awesome against almost any type of opponent. So unless you're using that whole, hey, I'm bluffing the river against someone that doesn't fold example, the game theoretically optimal line is probably going to be really good, but people don't take the line as often as they should because people tend to stress the easier line even when it's inappropriate. Additionally, I've recently started playing again myself, and even against weaker opponents, the game theoretically optimal lines are typically better by a lot than the lines I see most people taking. So, no excuses. We're going to go over the leaks I think most SSNL and lower players have, despite the fact that many are winning players. Today, we'll focus on why people emphasize betting too much and how to stop.